I devoted 33 years to my son. Then he called me a burden and kicked me out. He had no idea I was secretly a millionaire, and then For 33 years, my life had been stitched together with sacrifice, the kind of quiet suffering that doesn't win applause, just deeper lines across your face and permanent exhaustion behind your eyes. I poured everything I had into one person, my son Colin. I raised him as if the world owed him something, as if all of my failures could be redeemed through his success. And maybe that was the problem. I forgot that love given without limits often ends in imbalance. Colin wasn't even mine by blood. I met him when I was 28, volunteering weekends at a children's medical center in rural Missouri. He was a year old, abandoned with a hole in his heart and a medical chart so tragic most couples looking to adopt wouldn't glance at it twice. But I couldn't look away. His eyes held this strange silence, like he'd already understood life wouldn't give him much. I brought him home after 3 months of paperwork and a battle with my then-husband, Jeremy, who had no interest in raising someone else's child. When Jeremy told me I had to choose between staying married and keeping Colin, I didn't blink. I packed my things, took my new son, and walked out of that house without a single regret. I spent the next 3 decades giving Colin every piece of me. I worked 2 and sometimes 3 jobs, missed birthdays, ignored illnesses, and watched life slip by through the back windows of other people's houses while scrubbing their sinks and folding their laundry. For the last 20 years, I was a live-in caregiver for an elderly widow named Lorraine in Chicago. She was the only person in my life who treated me like more than an employee. She insisted I eat dinner at her table, bought me books, taught me how to read music, and over time, made me her confidant. When she passed, she left me everything, an estate worth over $7 million. But I didn't tell Colin. I wanted to see who he really was without the promise of wealth clouding the room. I decided to retire at 61. I was tired, my back ached every morning, and I had spent too many nights alone in unfamiliar cities. I thought that maybe, just maybe, I could go home and finally be part of a family again. Colin lived in Birmingham now, with his wife, Betrayal, in a house I had secretly paid off a few years ago. The deed was in their names, of course. They insisted it would help them qualify for tax breaks, and I, desperate for their acceptance, agreed. I arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The air smelled of wet pavement and fake lavender, Betrayal's signature cleaning spray. I was smiling when I stepped inside, suitcase in hand. I hadn't even gotten the words out. I'm not working for Lorraine anymore, when Colin's face darkened. He cut me off mid-sentence, his voice rising like a kettle about to scream. Wait, what? Why the hell would you quit that job? That was 10 grand a month. What are you planning to do now? Just sit around freeloading. I didn't respond at first. I blinked. My mouth hung open slightly, but nothing came out. I had imagined surprise, maybe even a little concern, but not contempt. Certainly not this quick dismissal. Not after everything I'd done. I just thought. I started, forcing my voice to stay calm. With Betrayal trying to get pregnant, maybe I could help. Cook, clean, be here when the baby comes. Betrayal barely looked up from her phone. Her voice was smooth, clipped. Postpartum recovery needs medical care. No offense, but you used to clean houses. What do you know about anything medical? I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste metal. Her mother, Marlene, who'd somehow wormed her way into their daily life like a second wife, chimed in from across the room. Taking care of an infant is delicate. You need training, certification, updated techniques. This isn't the 1980s. They tag-teamed their judgment like they'd practiced it. Betrayal set her phone down and added with a smug little smile. We've already planned for a night nurse and a day nanny. It's covered. But if you'd like to help, maybe you could contribute toward the cost. It's not cheap. My stomach twisted. So, you want me to pay for the baby care you won't let me give? Colin didn't flinch. Mom, we've got a lot of expenses coming. You shouldn't have quit your job without talking to us first. You need to keep working. Another 10 years, maybe 20. You're still healthy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to take a photo of every overnight bus ticket I ever bought just to come home for one of his birthdays. I wanted to shove into his hands the check stubs from the house I paid for, or the bills I covered when they said they were too tight. 1 month. Instead, I just said, I'm tired. I'm done working. Brielle snorted. Retired from what? You don't even have a pension. What are you retiring from? I didn't say it. I didn't mention the inheritance, didn't flaunt the trust fund. I wanted to see if there was even a flicker of respect for me left in Colin's chest without money tied to it. There wasn't. I tried to set aside for retirement years ago, I said quietly. You both asked me to help pay down the mortgage instead. You said it was the better choice. Colin raised his voice. You're stressing Brielle out. She needs calm right now, not your drama. You want peace. Go find another job and get your own place. Every word peeled another layer of me off. And when he added, honestly, you've always made bad choices. That's why we ended up broke. If you'd stayed married, maybe I'd have grown up with something better. I felt something inside me crack. He wasn't done. You think I owe you? You think you get to coast now because you sacrificed a few years? You chose this life. No one asked you to. You owe me for the rest of yours. He called me by my name, not Mom, for the first time in his life. Maggie, you wrecked my future before it started. I froze. His eyes weren't just angry. They were wild, hollow, desperate to blame anyone but himself. He kicked my suitcase over, the zipper bursting, my clothes spilling onto the tile. I said nothing, not a word. I just stood there, tears silently falling, watching the boy I once carried through hospital corridors scream at me like I was the reason the world hadn't handed him more. He had no idea, none, that I'd once chosen him over everything. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. But now, all I wanted was to disappear. I picked up my things, walked out without a sound, and hailed a cab. The first one I'd taken in years. I didn't look back. Not once. The cab ride to the city felt longer than it actually was, mostly because my mind refused to quiet. I kept replaying Colin's words in my head, over and over again like a scratched record that only played the ugliest parts. Every version of his voice, cold, venomous, dismissive, echoed against the windows until I finally asked the driver to turn the radio up, anything to drown it out. I watched streetlights blur through the raindrops, wondering when exactly the boy I raised had disappeared and who it was that had replaced him. By the time I checked into a hotel downtown, my hands were shaking from exhaustion, but not from the cold. I paid for a suite with a view, something absurdly lavish that I'd never let myself splurge on before. The concierge looked surprised when I handed over the black card, his polite professionalism cracking just slightly with curiosity. That night, I stared out over the skyline, clutching a glass of water like it might tether me to something real, and whispered to the empty room, "It's finally just me." The next morning, I called my lawyer, Alan, and asked him to begin the paperwork. I wanted the house, my house, transferred back under my name. I had every receipt, every record of every dollar I had poured into that home. Not one payment had come from Colin or Brielle, but the deed had their names printed on it like a joke I was never in on. I told Alan I didn't care how long it took or how much it cost. I was done playing the quiet benefactor in someone else's life. After that, I started house hunting. Not just any place. I wanted something they couldn't imagine me in. Something that would choke Brielle with envy and make Marlene swallow her superiority like poison. I scrolled through listings until my eyes hurt, narrowing in on a gated villa community outside the city known for its high walls and even higher prices. Lorraine once mentioned it in passing, saying her cousin lived there and never stopped bragging about it. That's when I decided. If I had to start over, I was going to start loud. I scheduled a showing through the agency's website using my initials. No one needed to know who I was. When I arrived, the lobby gleamed like a jewelry box. Polished marble, fresh orchids, a scent that cost more per bottle than I used to make in a week. A young woman greeted me at the entrance. Her smile was sincere, maybe even a little nervous. "I'm Delaney. I'm in training, but I'll do my best to show you around," she said. I liked her instantly. We'd barely taken a few steps when someone called out from across the room, sharp and high-pitched. "Who's handling client screening today? We letting anyone walking off the street now?" I turned my head and nearly laughed out loud when I saw who it was. Kelsey, Marlene's niece. The same one who bragged every holiday about her elite clientele and posted endless filtered selfies from open houses she didn't even close. She stormed over in heels that sounded like punishment, eyes narrowed into slits when she recognized me. "Well, look who it is," she said, her tone dripping with fake surprise. "Maggie?" I didn't realize they were offering guided tours for housekeepers now. Her voice rose just enough for the nearby group of potential buyers to glance over. "Or are you just here for the free coffee?" Delaney looked mortified, her hand frozen mid-gesture toward the brochure she'd been holding. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I just said, "I'm here to view a property. If you're not my agent, step aside." But Kelsey wasn't finished. She shoved herself between me and Delaney and called over 2 security guards like I'd snuck in through a service entrance. "Escort her out, please," she snapped. "She's wasting everyone's time." Before the guards could move, I calmly raised one hand. "On what grounds are you removing me?" I asked, letting the quiet stretch just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. "I've done nothing wrong. I scheduled this appointment. You can check your system." Kelsey scoffed. "Right? You scheduled a $1 million home tour. With what Monopoly money?" That's when the floor manager walked over. He was in his early 30s, dressed too sharp for someone not in front of a camera. "I'm Preston, the sales director." "Is there an issue?" he asked. Kelsey jumped in before I could speak. "She's just a former housemaid for a wealthy family. No way she can afford this place. I'm saving you time." Preston looked at me with cautious professionalism. "Ma'am, do you have any proof of funds? This is a closed property showcase. We do require verification." I didn't speak. I opened my folder and handed over the trust statement from Lorraine's estate, along with a copy of the bank account summary. Kelsey snatched it before Preston could read it and laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. "5 million, she shrieked. "Please, if this isn't fake, I'll eat my shoes." Then I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and turned the screen toward them. "Try 8.5, I said flatly. Gasps rippled through the showroom like a dropped stone in a still lake. I didn't look at Kelsey's face, but I felt the shift in the air as curiosity twisted into shame. Whispers broke out around us, little pieces of disbelief, admiration, even a trace of fear. Preston cleared his throat, suddenly much more respectful. "Ma'am, I deeply apologize for the misunderstanding. You are absolutely welcome here." I turned to Delaney. "She's the only one I want to work with. I'll be buying today, possibly 2 units. Kelsey tried to recover, but it was too late. Her mouth opened, but no words came. I turned away from her entirely and walked toward the display models with Delaney trailing behind, her eyes wide with awe and gratitude. I heard her whisper, "You're incredible," but I just nodded. I wasn't done yet. I toured the largest unit first. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, a sunroom that made me ache with longing, like it was already mine. I said yes on the spot. No second thoughts. Delaney teared up when I told her she'd just made her first sale. Then I said, "Let's get the paperwork started. And tell Preston, I'd like a word after we sign." An hour later, I stood in the middle of the showroom again, this time with the signed contract and proof of payment in hand. Kelsey stood off to the side, trying to pretend she wasn't watching. I lifted my voice just enough for her to hear. "Actually, I've decided to purchase a second property as well. But I'd like a formal apology first." Preston turned to Kelsey. "You heard her. Apologize." Kelsey's face contorted like she'd been asked to drink poison. "I won't," she snapped. "She's just trying to humiliate me. She used to clean for people like this." I smiled coldly. "And now I own 2 homes in a neighborhood you only get to walk through during business hours." Preston's patience snapped. "Security, escort her out. Effective immediately, her employment here is terminated." I stopped the guards just as they stepped forward. "No, she's not leaving just yet." I pulled out my phone again, this time to call the local precinct. I made the report with clarity. Yes, public defamation, harassment, and attempted removal without cause. I'm at the Avalon Vista property showroom. 10 minutes later, 2 officers arrived. The same ones who'd responded when I'd been shoved into the background of my own life once before. This time, though, I met them not as a servant, but as a buyer. After listening to the story, they issued Kelsey a formal warning. "One more complaint," one of them said. and we file criminal charges. You're lucky she's giving you the chance to walk out." Kelsey mumbled something that might have been sorry, but it didn't matter. I had the keys now. I had everything. And for the first time in years, I felt like I'd just begun living. It only took 3 days before the fallout began. I had barely unpacked a single box in my new home when I received the first message from Colin. It came through late in the evening, a text that buzzed onto my phone like a mosquito you don't see coming. "What the hell did you do to Kelsey?" it said. "Her whole family is coming after us now. They're demanding an apology. Fix it." I read it 3 times just to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. The same son who told me I was a burden, who shoved me out the door with my suitcase half-zipped, was now treating me like his personal conflict resolution team. I didn't even respond at first. I stared at the phone for a long minute, then set it down and let the silence answer for me. The next morning, I called the front desk of my new residence and gave them a very specific instruction. From this moment forward, I told the concierge, "Please refuse any gifts or messages from Colin or anyone connected to him. Also, kindly deliver anything they leave directly to the dumpster." A few hours later, a bouquet arrived anyway. The card tucked inside was written in his sloppy, hurried handwriting. "Hope you're doing well. Love, your son." I laughed without smiling. Then I dumped the entire arrangement into the kitchen trash, snapped a photo of it, and sent it directly to the concierge. "Forward this to him," I wrote. "Let it be the last thing I ever receive from that address." I thought that would be the end of it. I thought wrong. Colin began showing up in front of my gated community almost every day. Rain or shine, he stood there, sometimes in a nice coat, sometimes soaked to the bone, trying to catch a glimpse of me as I came and went. He even tried to flag down my car once, pressing his palms to the passenger window while sobbing like an abandoned child. "Mom, please, don't do this. I need you. You're all I have." I rolled up the window without saying a word and instructed the driver to continue without stopping. I didn't need a conversation. I needed peace. I was tired of men only remembering I existed when they needed saving. I didn't know him that anymore. I had already spent too many years breaking my back for someone who could barely look me in the eye without asking for something. After 2 weeks of these pathetic displays, Colin stopped coming around. I let myself believe, just briefly, that he'd finally gotten the message. Then the phone call came. It was a number I hadn't seen in more than 2 decades. The moment I picked up and heard the voice on the other end, I nearly dropped the phone. Richard, my ex-husband. The same man who once told me a sickly orphan didn't belong in his house. The one who'd called Colin that kid, until the day I walked out. "I just thought you should know," he began, his voice like sandpaper over glass. "Colin tracked me down, said you abandoned him, begged me to talk you into coming back." I didn't say anything at first. I waited for the punchline. "I told him the truth," Richard said after a pause. "Told him I'm not his real father, that I haven't been part of your life in 20 years, and I'm not interested in being part of his either." "Did you tell him why?" I asked, my voice quiet but sharp. "I told him enough," Richard replied. "I didn't give up your secrets. I kept my word." He hung up after that. No goodbye, no apology, just a warning in the form of a courtesy call. I knew what was coming next. Colin would return, this time angrier, this time more desperate. But he didn't knock on my door or wait at the gate again. No, he went online. I discovered it the following week, when a neighbor mentioned something odd to me at the community garden. "Hey," she said cautiously, "there's a guy on Streamloop talking about his mom. Says she left him for money. I think it might be about you." I went home, pulled out my laptop, and found it in seconds. Colin's face filled the screen, red-eyed and earnest, framed perfectly for sympathy. His voice cracked just enough, his pauses timed like a cheap soap opera. The channel was called My Mother Forgot Me, and it had over 30,000 subscribers. In his videos, he painted himself as a broken son betrayed by a heartless mother who chose wealth over family. He claimed I cut him off the moment I got rich, that I had offered no help when Brielle got pregnant, that I had left him living in poverty while I basked in luxury. The lies came fast, dressed in soft music and carefully edited clips. He never mentioned the house I paid for, never mentioned the medical bills I'd covered since he was a toddler, never mentioned how he kicked me out when I stopped working. Instead, he let strangers imagine I was some cruel social climber who traded love for real estate. The comments were a circus of pity and outrage. She doesn't deserve to be called a mother. What kind of woman abandons her child after everything? If that were my mom, I'd be in pieces. I sat there, staring at the screen, and felt the fury rise like steam inside me. Not because people believed him, but because I had let him become this. Because I had raised him without teaching him where the line of decency was. Because I had protected him from pain so well that he never learned what it meant to respect someone who sacrificed everything for him. That night, I called my lawyer again. I want to file for defamation, I said flatly. I want every video removed, every lie exposed, every penny he's collected under my name returned. Alan was calm, as always. We can do that, he said. We'll send a cease and desist. If he doesn't stop, we go to court. But I wasn't ready to hand this one over yet. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I made an account, a public one. I titled my first live video "The Truth Behind the Lie." I opened with a quiet smile, introduced myself, and said simply, "My name is Maggie. I'm the woman you've been hearing about." I offered no sobs, no drama, just facts. I showed the adoption certificate, signed and sealed, from the Missouri Department of Child Services. I uploaded photos of his medical records, blanked for privacy, but marked with my signature, dated back to when he was still in diapers. I uploaded bank statements, tax records, tuition receipts. I played an audio clip, his voice on speaker, casually asking if I could go live in some old man's house to keep earning. My audience tripled in minutes. The comments turned. Suddenly, people were writing things like, "Your son is a parasite. Thank you for showing the truth. We believe you. He deserves to be cut off." I didn't want fame. I didn't care about winning public sympathy. I wanted my name back. I wanted my silence to stop protecting the very person who had weaponized my kindness. I wanted to remind Colin, and every person who thought love meant endless submission, that I may have been quiet all those years, but I was never powerless. Not anymore. I thought going public would be enough to stop him, or at least force him to slink back into silence. I thought the documents, the receipts, the audio clips would serve as a final nail in the coffin of his little pity empire. But Colin wasn't embarrassed, and he wasn't done, not even close. Instead, he doubled down, turning his live streams into full-blown therapy sessions where he cried on command and peddled his pain for views. Even if she adopted me, she made that decision. I didn't ask to be rescued, he said one night, eyes red, voice trembling. Maybe if I'd gone to another family, things would have been different. Better. He wasn't talking to me anymore. He was talking to a crowd that would eat up his sorrow with a spoon and ask for seconds. He called me manipulative, cold, claimed I threw money in his face after a lifetime of neglect. He framed the truth I told online as a smear campaign, accusing me of using my wealth to ruin his life and silence his truth. His fan base had morphed into something darker. People who didn't care what was real, only what sounded painful enough to be shared. His lies became currency, and he spent them like a man drowning in debt. What he didn't realize was that the tide had already turned. The same viewers who had once sent him donations and sympathetic comments started to question things when they dug a little deeper. A few of them found the court documents I'd filed, the verified legal statements, the interview I'd done on a podcast where I told my story, not with theatrics, but with steady honesty. They clipped sections of my live stream, compared them to his, and the contradiction became impossible to ignore. One night, I opened my laptop to find Colin's live stream flooded with angry messages. "You said she never helped you, but she paid for your college. Didn't you kick her out of the house she bought you? She showed adoption papers, man. You said she was your birth mother." Colin's smile faltered. His voice lost its rhythm. For the first time in weeks, he looked like someone who had just realized the script wasn't working anymore. He tried to recover, but his words sounded hollow, like he didn't even believe them himself. "She manipulated me," he mumbled. "You don't understand what it was like growing up with her." But people had stopped listening. They were watching now, really watching, and they didn't like what they saw. Within days, his sponsorship deals disappeared. The affiliate links he'd proudly promoted vanished from his page. His follower count dipped, then plunged, then collapsed altogether. The final blow came when the platform itself suspended his account indefinitely for repeated violations of community guidelines and spreading false information for personal gain. I expected silence after that, but Colin wasn't the type to go quietly. When the money stopped flowing, he panicked. He began sending messages to every number he still had access to: extended family, friends, former coworkers, even distant acquaintances, saying I had destroyed him. He claimed I used legal threats to erase his livelihood and was trying to ruin his reputation forever. When that didn't work, he started showing up again, this time not at my gate, but at the office of my lawyer, Alan, where he screamed in the lobby until security escorted him out. I wasn't scared. I was done being scared of a man I had once carried on my back to the ER when he couldn't breathe. I wasn't afraid of the boy I had once held during fevered nights while praying he'd survive the next morning. I wasn't afraid of the child I fed, clothed, and fought for while the world passed us by like we were invisible. I had looked after him for 33 years, and now I was looking after myself. That was the only difference. I took the case to court. The lawsuit covered defamation, emotional damage, and harassment. My legal team included not just Alan, but a communications expert and a cybersecurity analyst who had tracked Colin's online behavior. They pulled records, backed up every claim, and built a case so solid that even Colin's own court-appointed lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear under the table during the hearings. Colin didn't say much during the trial. He barely looked at me. When he did, I saw it. Not hatred, not even anger, but fear. The realization that I wasn't going to save him this time. The knowledge that I wasn't standing in front of a judge to plead for leniency. I was there for closure, for peace, for justice, and for myself. The court ruled in my favor on every count. He was ordered to pay damages, to issue a formal retraction and public apology, and to cover all legal fees related to the case. The judge even approved an injunction barring him from ever using my name, likeness, or history in any future media, digital or otherwise. He couldn't speak about me again, not legally, not publicly, not even in passing. And still, that wasn't the part that broke him. It was what came next. I moved forward with the property reclamation process. The house I'd bought for Colin and Betrayal, the one they proudly lived in without ever contributing a dime, had been purchased with money I could prove came from my accounts exclusively. I had receipts, mortgage documents, wire transfers. The judge saw through the thin arguments their side offered. Within a few weeks, a final ruling transferred the property back into my name. Colin and Betrayal were served with a formal notice of eviction. Colin tried to appeal. It didn't work. Betrayal didn't fight. In fact, she filed for divorce 3 weeks after the notice was served. She didn't even flinch when she signed the papers, just handed them over to her attorney with the kind of numb efficiency you only develop when the person beside you becomes a liability. I heard from someone, one of Marlene's bitter friends, that Betrayal had moved back in with her mother temporarily. Apparently, she'd said, "There's nothing left to salvage. He's hollow inside." Colin disappeared after that. No forwarding address. No more live streams. No desperate texts. Nothing. It was as if the moment he lost the ability to use my name, he lost his purpose. I didn't ask where he went. I didn't want to know. The silence was a gift. I wasn't about to go chasing the sound of old pain just because I could. Instead, I sold the 2 villas I'd purchased. The market had turned in my favor, and I walked away with more than I'd put in, enough to start again, this time on my own terms. I chose a small lakeside town in the Pacific Northwest. It wasn't flashy, but it was beautiful, quiet, the kind of place where no one knew your past and didn't ask questions unless you invited them in. I found a home tucked between evergreens and water, where the morning light came in soft and the air carried the scent of pine and earth instead of bleach and disappointment. I started painting again. Nothing professional, just colors and movement, a way to remind myself I had hands for something other than scrubbing someone else's floor. I learned how to make coffee just the way I liked it. I began walking barefoot through my own garden. I planted wisteria just because Lorraine once told me it bloomed in the most determined way. Sometimes people still ask if I regret raising Colin. I never know how to answer that in a sentence. But now, I think the truth is this. I don't regret giving love. I only regret giving it to someone who thought it made me weak. And that kind of regret, I can live with. Months passed quietly, which is exactly what I had wanted. I adjusted to the rhythm of my new life with deliberate gentleness, savoring every peaceful moment as if I had spent decades starving for them, which, in truth, I had. No one banged on my door demanding rent money. No one called in the middle of the night with accusations wrapped in guilt. There were no sudden bursts of tension, no long silences filled with expectations I could never meet. The stillness, at first, felt foreign, like a luxury I hadn't earned, but slowly, it began to feel like home. I took up piano again, something I hadn't touched in years. Lorraine had introduced me to it, insisting music had a way of stitching the soul back together without ever saying a word. I believed her then, and I believed her even more now. I bought a grand piano, not out of extravagance, but because I finally could, and placed it by the windows that faced the lake. Each morning, I played whatever came to mind. Sometimes old pieces, sometimes nothing structured at all, just keys and breath and the quiet reassurance that no one could interrupt me anymore. It was during one of those mornings, as the sun was rising and the fog clung low to the water, that I received a message from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Her name was Cheryl, and she'd been the one person who stood by me in those early years after I left my husband, even when everyone else turned away. She still lived down south, in Alabama, and we caught up now and then, mostly through holiday cards and forwarded jokes. But this message wasn't a joke. I heard something about Colin. It began. I didn't want to tell you at first, but I thought maybe you should know. I didn't respond right away. I stared at the screen, my fingers frozen above the keys. He's in Alberta now, she continued. I saw a video. Someone posted it on a local forum. He's not well. Living on the street, it looks like. There's something off about him. His eyes look strange, like he's not all there anymore. I clicked the link she included without thinking, my heart already tightening in my chest. It led to a short clip taken by someone passing through a city alley, phone held low and shaky. The camera zoomed in on a man curled beside a dumpster, his clothes torn and face smudged with dirt. He rocked slowly, hands clutched around a piece of bread that was more mold than anything edible. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Just trembling lips and a 1,000-yard stare that didn't seem to register the world around him. I had to pause the video. Even without the sound, I knew it was Colin. His features were thinner, sunken, aged far beyond his years, but it was him. The boy I had once cradled through coughing fits. The teenager I had stayed up with, helping him study for his college entrance exams. The man who once yelled at me for quitting a job that paid more than most people made in a year. He had become a ghost walking through a story he couldn't control anymore. And I didn't feel satisfaction. Not even a trace of it. I didn't feel anger either. What I felt, what bloomed inside me like a cold, slow tide, was something quieter, heavier. A resignation so complete it left no space for grief or vindication. I had expected some part of me to want to reach out, maybe even to forgive. But watching him now, it was clear that there was nothing to reach for. Whatever bond we'd once had already disintegrated long before that clip was filmed. What remained was memory. Nothing more. People say that if you love someone, you never truly stop. I disagree. Sometimes, love can rot. It can be fed to someone who only knows how to chew it up and spit it back at you until it loses all meaning. I gave everything I had to Colin, not because I wanted to be repaid, but because I wanted to believe that love could turn something broken into something whole. And maybe it could have, once. But not anymore. After watching that video, I closed my laptop and walked outside, barefoot, letting the cool morning grass ground me again. I sat on the steps of my back porch, wrapped in a shawl, and watched a pair of ducks drift across the lake. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know what I had done or lost. And they didn't need to. That was the comfort in nature, its total indifference. The world kept spinning no matter who hated me or loved me, no matter what I had given up or gained. A few weeks later, I sold the 2 villas I'd bought during the height of my anger. The profit was more than enough to close every legal chapter cleanly. including the costs of the lawsuit and property transfers. I donated a portion to a women's shelter not far from where I used to work, and another part to a scholarship fund for foster youth with medical conditions. It didn't erase what had happened, but it felt right, like completing a sentence that had been left unfinished for too many years. The rest I invested simply. No grand gestures, no flashy purchases, just security, safety, a quiet cushion under the life I was finally learning to enjoy. Every now and then, I pass someone who reminds me of Lorraine, a certain tilt of the head or way of holding a book, and I remember her laugh, her grace, her unwavering kindness. She gave me more than just an inheritance. She gave me dignity. She reminded me that being invisible to some people doesn't mean you're worthless. It just means they were never meant to see you clearly to begin with. As for Colin, I don't speak his name anymore. Not out of spite, but because there is no story left to tell. He became what he chose, and I no longer carry the weight of it. I don't ask about him, and I've made it clear to everyone around me that I don't want to hear updates. If he recovers, good. If he doesn't, that's no longer mine to mourn. In the mornings, I still play the piano. I keep my favorite teas lined up in little glass jars. I grow tomatoes, though I never quite get the timing right for planting. I spend hours painting leaves and sky, and sometimes nothing at all, just streaks of color that feel like breathing on canvas. I've met a few neighbors. We have quiet dinners and long, winding conversations about books, music, and sometimes nothing meaningful at all. And no one calls me mom anymore. Not to ask for money, not to ask for favors, not to guilt me, not to blame me. And that, strangely enough, has become the purest kind of peace. People ask me, more often than you'd think, if I regret adopting him. If I regret the years, the sacrifices, the love that clearly wasn't returned. And the truth is, I don't. Not really. I regret the way I abandoned myself for someone who never learned how to love. I regret the years I mistook obligation for connection. But I don't regret giving a child a second chance at life. Because even if he failed to see the worth in it, I did what I believed was right. And in the end, I did something even more important. I learned how to choose myself. Not out of bitterness, not out of revenge, but out of something I had buried for too long, respect for my own damn soul. I was never a perfect mother, but I was an honest one. And now, for the first time, I get to be something better, a woman who belongs only to herself.